Caleb Hart arrived in the small mountain town on a warm afternoon when the sun was soft and the air smelled faintly of pine. He rode in on an old bus, with a single bag resting on his lap and his hat pulled low over his eyes. He didn't say much to the driver or anyone else who stepped on or off. Caleb was the kind of man who preferred silence, not because he disliked people, but because he carried more memories than he knew how to share. The people in town noticed him that first day. A few curious eyes followed him as he crossed the street, taking in the way his boots were worn and his shirt sleeves rolled up from long hours of ranch work. There was something steady about the way he walked, as if he was used to wide fields and open sky. But there was also something heavy in his gaze, something that hinted at a past he hadn't managed to outrun. He found work quickly. The owner of a nearby ranch, an older man named Mr. Harmon, believed in giving quiet folks a chance. Caleb didn't promise much during the interview. He simply said, "I know how to work." And that was enough. Within a week, he was settling into a simple bunkhouse room on the ranch, waking early to help with the horses, fences, and long days of chores. Most people on the ranch didn't know what to make of him. Caleb wasn't unfriendly, but he wasn't outgoing either. He didn't join the others when they went into town on Friday nights. He didn't talk about where he came from or why he left, but he always showed up on time. He always finished what he started, and whenever someone needed help, he was the first to step forward without being asked. After a few weeks, he started visiting the small church on the hill every Sunday afternoon. He never went during services, when the pews were full and people were dressed in their best clothes. Instead, he came after everyone had left. The church was old, older than most buildings in the town, and the pastor was always looking for volunteers to help repair it. Caleb didn't volunteer in the formal sense. He just showed up with tools, nodded politely to whoever was there, and worked until sunset. That was where he met Mara Dawson. The first time he saw her, she was standing on a wooden ladder repainting the trim around a window. Her hair was tied back loosely, and the sun made strands of it glow like warm gold. She hummed softly to herself, completely focused on her work. Caleb paused, before noticing she had dropped a small paintbrush near the steps. He picked it up and held it out for her. "You dropped this," he said quietly. She turned so quickly she nearly lost her balance. But Caleb steadied the ladder with one large hand. When she looked down at him, her face was gentle, the kind that made people feel welcome without trying. "Thank you," she said with an easy smile. "I keep doing that." Caleb only nodded. He wanted to respond but didn't know what to say. She didn't seem bothered by his quiet nature, though. She climbed down, took the brush, and stepped back to admire the window she had been working on. "My name is Mara," she said, offering her hand. "Caleb," he replied, giving her a small handshake before stepping back. Mara didn't ask many questions, which Caleb appreciated. Instead, she simply returned to her work, and after a moment, he did too. They worked in comfortable silence, the kind of silence that didn't need filling. Caleb fixed loose boards along the back wall and carried old boxes down from the storage attic. Mara painted, swept, and sorted donation items. After that day, it became almost a routine. Whenever Caleb showed up, Mara was already there. Sometimes singing softly while wiping down benches. Sometimes sitting thoughtfully with church papers spread around her. She seemed to be someone who took care of everything too much, maybe. It didn't take long for Caleb to notice the tired look that sometimes crossed her face when she thought no one was watching. He didn't ask her about it. Caleb believed people had a right to their quiet struggles, just as he had his. But he saw it anyway, the way her shoulders tightened when she read messages on her phone, the way she forced a smile when neighbors greeted her warmly, the way she worked longer hours than any volunteer should. One late afternoon, when the sun was creating long golden shadows across the church steps, Mara finally spoke about something real. "Have you ever felt like you're holding too many pieces of something broken?" she asked softly, not looking at him. Caleb paused, dusting off his hands from fixing a cracked beam. Yes, he answered honestly. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she nodded, as if his simple reply meant more than a long explanation. It was the first time she seemed less alone. Over the following weeks, Caleb learned more about her, not through questions, but through small moments, overheard conversations, and the way she carried herself. Mara was the pastor's daughter, but she didn't live a peaceful life like people assumed. She handled most of the church's responsibilities, helped her family, supported community events, and somehow managed to be the person everyone leaned on when they were struggling. But no one seemed to notice when she needed the same support in return. Caleb noticed. He noticed when she arrived with red eyes one evening, pretending she had allergies. He noticed when she apologized too quickly over tiny mistakes. He noticed the hesitation in her voice whenever someone mentioned her fiancé, a man who seemed to bring her more stress than comfort. Still, she kept showing up. She kept painting, cleaning, organizing, and welcoming people with a soft smile. Mara was strong, in a gentle way, and Caleb found himself drawn to that strength. For Caleb, the church became more than a quiet place to work. It became a place where he felt steady inside. A place where he didn't feel like a man running from memories he rarely spoke of. And part of that calm came from Mara. She had a way of making the world feel less heavy, even when she carried her own burdens. One evening, as the sky darkened and the warm air cooled, Mara sat on the church steps after finishing her work. Caleb walked out with his tools, ready to head back to the ranch, but he paused when he saw her. "You okay?" he asked in his slow, low voice. She looked up at him and tried to give a small smile. "Just tired," she whispered. Caleb didn't know how to comfort people with words, so he simply sat beside her, leaving a small space between them. They watched the town lights blink softly below the hill. The breeze carried the smell of pine and the faint sound of distant music from a cafe down the street. "You don't talk much," Mara said after a long pause, her voice lighter than before. "No," Caleb admitted. "That's okay," she said. "Sometimes quiet people say the most without speaking." He wasn't sure what she meant by that, but he felt a warmth in his chest he hadn't felt in years. They sat together for a long while, saying nothing more. And for the first time in a long time, Caleb didn't feel like leaving as soon as the work was done. He didn't know it yet. But that quiet moment on the steps was the beginning of something he never expected, a connection he didn't ask for but found anyway. And though neither of them knew what the future held, there was something gentle and real growing in the space between them. Caleb returned to the ranch that night feeling lighter. And the old church on the hill, though worn and weathered, became the place where two hearts, one tired from giving too much, the other tired from carrying too much, found a space to breathe. It was only the beginning. Mara Dawson had always been the kind of person people trusted without thinking. From a young age, she grew up helping in the church, arranging chairs for events, folding programs, and making sure everyone felt welcomed. Her kindness came naturally, like breathing. But somewhere along the way, people began to expect it from her, not just appreciate it. And when people expect too much for too long, it becomes heavy, even if the person carrying it never complains. Everyone in town liked Mara. They admired her. They said she had a warm heart, or a gentle way of seeing the world. But very few ever looked closely enough to see the weight behind her soft smile. Very few saw how tired her eyes sometimes were, or how much pressure she quietly carried on her shoulders. Caleb noticed, though. Before Caleb arrived in town, Mara had been dealing with more than anyone knew. She was trying to keep the church running smoothly, while her father, the pastor, struggled with health issues that left him unable to do as much as he used to. Her mother tried to help, but she had her own responsibilities at home. So most of the work fell on Mara, organizing events, making calls, cleaning, fixing small issues, managing schedules, and talking to members who came with problems. She always listened. She always helped. but no one thought to ask if she was doing okay. And she never said. Then there was her fiancé. Andrew, a man everyone insisted was perfect for her, because he came from a respected family and had a successful job. But success meant little when someone didn't know how to be gentle. Andrew wasn't unkind on purpose, but he didn't understand Mara. He didn't understand softness. He didn't understand that she needed calm, patience, kindness, and time. Instead, he pushed her to make decisions quickly, to take on more responsibilities, to be the person he imagined she should be. He criticized her when she forgot something. He made her feel small when she was simply tired. And slowly, without realizing it, Mara began to shrink her own thoughts and feelings so they wouldn't cause conflict. She didn't tell Caleb any of this directly, but small pieces slipped through the cracks of her tired smile. One evening, about a month after they first met, the two were working side by side in the church storage room. The place was dusty, filled with old boxes and decorations from past events, streamers, candle holders, banners that read hopeful phrases. Caleb was organizing a shelf where things had been stacked unevenly. Mara was sorting donation envelopes. The air felt warm and still. Only the soft sound of papers rustling filled the room. After a long moment of silence, Mara sighed, the kind of sigh that comes from deep inside. Caleb looked at her quietly. "Something wrong?" he asked, careful with his words. She shook her head at first, but after a moment, she nodded. "It's just been a long day. You can rest if you need to," Caleb said. She let out a small laugh. "I wish it worked like that. There's always something to do." Quote. Caleb didn't respond right away. He didn't know how to fix things with words, but he understood what it meant to feel tired in a way that had nothing to do with physical work. After another minute, Mara put down a stack of envelopes and sat on a small wooden crate. Her voice softened. "Sometimes I feel like I can't slow down. Like if I stop even for a moment, everything will fall apart." Caleb set aside the box he was holding and leaned one shoulder against the wall. "Everything won't fall apart," he said quietly. "You're allowed to rest." Mara looked at him with surprise. People told her she did too much, but no one ever said she was allowed to stop. "Maybe," she whispered. The room fell into silence again, but this time, it felt different, softer, more open. Later that night, as Caleb walked her out, the sun had already dipped behind the hill. The church lights glowed warmly against the evening sky. Mara stood at the door for a moment, looking tired but peaceful. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For just being here. You don't talk much, but you listen. And sometimes, that's more than most people do." Caleb didn't know how to respond, so he just nodded. But inside, her words stirred something he hadn't felt in a long time. A feeling he wasn't sure he deserved. Days turned into weeks, and a quiet friendship grew between them, built slowly and naturally. They didn't need to speak much. The comfort came from simply being near each other, working on small projects, sharing small moments of peace. Mara found herself looking forward to the evenings when Caleb came to help. His presence was steady, calm, grounding. When he worked, he focused entirely, and she found that comforting. It made her feel safe in a way she hadn't felt in a while. Caleb, too, felt drawn to Mara without fully understanding why. He was used to being alone, used to keeping his life behind quiet walls. But Mara had a gentle way of opening doors without even trying. She never asked intrusive questions, never pushed him to share more than he wanted. Her kindness wasn't loud. It was soft, patient, and sincere. And that made it easier for him to be near her. One afternoon, during a church fundraiser event, Mara's quiet struggles became harder to hide. She had spent days preparing, making signs, organizing donation tables, coordinating volunteers, and dealing with last-minute changes that seemed endless. By the time the event started, she had barely eaten and was running on pure determination. At the end of the day, the last thing she expected was to run into Andrew, who arrived late and immediately began questioning her decisions. "Why didn't you call me earlier?" he asked with mild frustration. "You were busy," she said quietly. "I didn't want to bother you." "You should have told me anyway," he insisted. "Some things could have been handled better." Mara didn't argue. She never did. She just lowered her eyes and let the comments wash over her, pretending they didn't hurt. Caleb saw the whole thing from across the room. He didn't step in. He didn't say a word. But the way Mara's shoulders drooped under pressure stayed with him long after Andrew walked away. When the event ended, Mara stayed behind to clean up. Caleb helped, without being asked. They worked quietly until the last table was folded and the last box was stored. As they stepped outside into the cool evening air, Mara tried to smile, but it looked fragile. "You don't have to stay every time," she told him softly. "I know," Caleb replied. "So why do you?" He didn't answer quickly. He looked at her for a long moment, noticing the tiredness behind her eyes, the way she held herself like someone trying not to fall apart. "Because you shouldn't have to do everything alone," he said simply. Her breath caught slightly, as if no one had ever said those words to her before. They stood there for a moment. The sky above them painted in soft shades of blue and silver. Mara's heart felt tight, but not in a painful way, in a way that felt like hope trying to grow. Over the next few days, Mara's life became more tangled. Her responsibilities grew heavier, conversations with her fiancé became colder, and her father's health required more of her attention. She smiled through it all, but the smile didn't reach her eyes anymore. Caleb noticed. He started staying a little later, working a little harder, hoping to make her load lighter without making her feel guilty about it. He didn't say anything, but his presence became a quiet comfort in her chaotic days. One evening, as they cleaned the church hall, Mara stopped suddenly, holding onto the back of a chair as if steadying herself. "You okay?" Caleb asked. She took a slow breath. "Just overwhelmed. Everything feels like too much lately." Caleb moved closer, not too close, but close enough to show he cared. "You don't have to pretend with me." Her eyes filled with emotion, but she blinked it away quickly. "I'm not used to having someone say that." Caleb didn't touch her. He didn't speak too much. He just stayed there, steady and calm, letting her know she wasn't alone. And for the first time in a long time, Mara felt something inside her loosen the first small crack in the wall she'd built around her heart. She didn't know it yet, but she was starting to lean toward Caleb in ways she couldn't explain. And Caleb, though he tried to hide it, was beginning to feel a deep, quiet protectiveness toward her. Two tired souls, slowly finding comfort in each other's presence. Neither of them knew what was coming next, but everything was about to change. The day the storm arrived started like any other. The air was warm in the morning, but by noon the sky had shifted into a deep gray. Clouds drifted above the mountains, slowly building into something heavy. People in town mentioned that rain was coming, but no one expected anything unusual. In the small mountain town, storms came and went often, passing through like quiet travelers. Caleb spent most of his day at the ranch, repairing fences that had loosened from last season's weather. The horses were restless. Animals always sensed changes before people did. As he worked, he kept thinking about Mara. She had seemed tired the last time he saw her, more tired than usual, as if she was trying to carry something too big for one person. He thought about stopping by the church later, not to disturb her, but just to check in, to make sure she wasn't working too late again. By early evening, dark clouds had gathered tightly, turning the sky into a dim shade of purple. A cool wind brushed across the fields, shaking the tall grass. Thunder rumbled softly in the distance, like something far away stretching awake. Caleb finished his chores and headed back toward the bunkhouse, planning to change before going into town. As he walked, a soft drizzle began to fall. He paused, glancing up at the sky. It looked like the kind of storm that would pick up quickly. He wondered if Mara was still at the church. She often stayed late to finish tasks no one else had time for. He hoped she didn't get caught in the weather. Meanwhile, Mara was inside the old church, sitting at a wooden table covered with donation ledgers, envelopes, and handwritten notes. The fundraiser had been exhausting, and she wanted to make sure everything was counted and recorded correctly before the week ended. She told her parents she would only be gone for an hour, but time slipped away from her without her noticing. The church was quiet, the only sound coming from the soft tapping of rain against the windows. The light outside dimmed, making the stained glass windows glow in muted colors. Mara had always loved the calm of the church when it was empty. It let her breathe in a way she couldn't anywhere else. But that evening, she felt unusually distracted. Thoughts pushed against her mind, her father's health, her fiancé's impatience, the growing pressure she carried. She rubbed her forehead gently, closed the ledger, and stood up to stretch. She planned to go home soon. She could finish the rest tomorrow. Outside, the drizzle had turned into steady rain. The wind grew stronger, bending the branches of trees. A low roll of thunder passed through the sky. Mara walked to the front door and peeked outside. The town below was blurry from the rain. She hesitated. Maybe she should leave now, before the weather grew worse. But something made her turn back. She had left one last box of donation envelopes on the back table. She decided she could finish sorting them quickly. She didn't want to leave things half done. As she walked toward the box, a sudden flash of light brightened the sky through the windows. The thunder that followed was louder this time, shaking the quiet inside the church. Mara paused, breathing slowly. Storms normally didn't bother her. She found them peaceful, even soothing. But tonight felt different, maybe because she was already stressed, or maybe because she was alone in a large building. Still, she tried to focus on her work. At the same time, Caleb rode toward the town on his horse, choosing not to wait for the storm to get stronger. He kept a steady pace, though rain splashed against his hat and shirt. The wind tugged at his coat as he guided the horse toward the hill where the church stood. Something urged him to go faster. A quiet feeling he couldn't explain. When he reached the base of the hill, he noticed something unusual. Through the rain and dim light, he saw a faint, warm glow around the roof of the church. At first, he thought it was the church lights reflecting strangely through the storm. But then he saw it again, a small flicker near the corner of the roof. Caleb narrowed his eyes. The glow was too bright, too orange. Something was wrong. He urged his horse forward quickly and climbed the hill. The closer he got, the more clearly he saw it. A section of the old wooden roof had caught fire, likely from the storm's lightning. The flames were small, but the wind pushed at them, feeding them. Smoke rose slowly into the darkening sky. Caleb's heart tightened. Mara's car was parked beside the church. She was inside. He did not panic. He did not shout. Caleb simply climbed off his horse and ran toward the front doors, letting the rain soak through his shirt. He pulled the door open and stepped inside. "Mara," he called, his voice steady but urgent. There was no answer at first. The church looked normal, quiet, soft, but a faint haze drifted through the air, and a light smell of smoke floated around him. He walked deeper inside. "Mara?" At that moment, she appeared from the back hallway, holding a stack of donation papers close to her chest. She looked surprised to see him. "Caleb, you're here?" she said, confused. "What's wrong?" "There's a fire on the roof," he said gently but clearly. "We need to leave." Her eyes widened, and she immediately started moving toward him. She didn't panic either. Her first thought was simply to get out safely. But halfway across the church hall, a soft crackling sound echoed from above. Mara looked up. A small section of the ceiling near the back wall had darkened from smoke. The fire was spreading faster than either of them expected. Caleb stepped in front of her without thinking. "Come on," he said, guiding her toward the exit. But just as they reached the center aisle, part of the wooden beam overhead shifted with a soft groan. A small piece fell, hitting the floor near them, making Mara gasp softly. Caleb gently held her arm. "It's okay. We'll move slowly." He didn't rush her. He didn't force her. He simply stayed close, keeping her calm. Mara trusted him, and that trust made her steps steady, even in the growing haze. The air inside grew warmer, and the faint smell of burning wood drifted stronger through the hall. The storm outside roared louder, rain pounding against the windows, but the wind seemed to push the fire further along the roof. Caleb kept Mara close, guiding her toward the front entrance. Mara held onto his sleeve, lightly, not out of fear, but because she felt steadier with him beside her. When they reached the front doors, Caleb pushed one open. Cool air rushed inside, brushing against their warm faces. Mara breathed out, relieved. They stepped outside, letting the fresh, wet air wash away the heaviness of smoke. But when Mara turned back to look at the church, her heart tightened. The glow on the roof had grown brighter. The place she had loved and worked in for years was being touched by something she couldn't stop. She stepped closer to Caleb without realizing it. He placed a steady hand near her back, not touching, just close enough to reassure her. "You're safe," he said softly. The storm continued around them, but the moment felt strangely still. Mara's breath shook slightly, not from fear, but from everything she had been holding inside for so long. Caleb stood beside her, warm and steady despite the rain. She looked up at him, her eyes full of emotion she could no longer hide. Everything had changed in just a few minutes, not because of the fire, but because of the truth it revealed. She mattered to him, and he mattered to her. It was only the beginning of a night neither of them would forget. The rain continued to fall softly, though the storm had begun to move farther down the mountains. A cool breeze brushed across the hill, carrying a fresh smell that mixed with the faint scent of smoke. The church behind them glowed with small orange reflections from inside. But the firefighters had already been called, and help was on the way. The danger was passing, but for Mara, the weight inside her chest had not passed. She stood near the steps of the church, her hands pressed against her chest, her breath shaky as she tried to steady herself. She was not frightened of the fire. Instead, she felt overwhelmed by everything that had happened, not just tonight, but in the weeks and months leading up to this moment. It was as if the fire had simply unlocked all the emotions she had kept inside, quietly and patiently, for far too long. Caleb stood beside her, close enough that she could feel his calm presence, yet far enough to give her space to breathe. He lifted his hat slightly, letting some of the rain cool his forehead. And he watched her gently, not with judgment, not with confusion, just with quiet understanding. "You're safe now," he said softly. His voice was steady, warm, like the kind of sound someone might hold onto in a trembling moment. Mara nodded, but she could not speak. Her throat felt tight in a way that surprised her. Tears she hadn't expected pressed behind her eyes, blurring the world around her. She tried to blink them away. She had cried only a handful of times in her adult life and almost always alone. She didn't like showing her feelings, especially not to people she cared about. She didn't want to burden anyone. Caleb noticed the way her hands shook slightly, and his expression softened even more. "It's all right," he murmured. Something about his voice, the kindness in it, the steadiness she had come to know so well, broke the last of her resistance. Mara took a small step toward him, then another. She wasn't thinking, she simply moved because her heart needed something solid to lean on. Caleb didn't move or speak, he just waited. Finally, with a soft, uneven breath, Mara leaned her forehead gently against his chest. Her tears fell quietly, not loud or dramatic. Her shoulders trembled with weeks of pressure, months of frustration, and years of carrying too much alone. Caleb's hands hovered for a moment, unsure if she wanted to be touched. He didn't want to assume, but when she whispered his name in a small, broken voice. Caleb. He understood. And he gently rested one hand against her upper back, offering comfort without holding too tightly. His other hand stayed at his side, respectful, steady. Mara relaxed slightly, her breath softening against his chest. The sound of the rain became slower, softer, almost peaceful. After a moment, Mara whispered, her voice shaking, "I'm sorry. I don't usually get like this." "You don't have to be sorry," Caleb replied quietly. "Not with me." She took another trembling breath. "Everything has been so hard lately. My family needs me. The church needs me. The town needs me. And I try to be strong for everyone. But tonight, I couldn't hold it anymore." Caleb nodded slowly, though she couldn't see it. "I know what it feels like to carry too much," he said in a gentle voice. "It doesn't make you weak. It just makes you human." His words touched a part of her heart she never showed anyone. Tears slid down her cheeks, warm against the cool night air. "I've been holding so much inside," she whispered. "And when I saw the fire, I thought everything I've worked for was just going to disappear. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to stay calm. And then you were there." She paused, swallowing softly. "You always show up," she whispered. "Even when I don't ask." Caleb looked down at her, his eyes full of something quiet and deep. "I come because I want to," he said. "Not because you ask." Mara closed her eyes at his words. She felt safe in a way that surprised her. Safe not just from danger, but from the heaviness she usually hid. Caleb didn't expect anything from her. He didn't demand anything. He didn't want her to be someone she wasn't. He simply cared. And that simple care felt like warmth in the cold rain. She pulled back a little, just enough to look at his face. Her eyes were still wet, but her expression was softer now, full of gratitude instead of fear. "Caleb," she began, her voice fragile. But she couldn't finish the sentence. The words she wanted to say were too tangled, too emotional. She wasn't even sure how to explain the complicated mix of relief, affection, and exhaustion she felt. Caleb lifted a hand slowly and touched her cheek with the lightest, most respectful motion barely there. A gentle brush of comfort. He wiped away one of her tears with his thumb. Careful and slow. Mara's breath caught softly, not in fear, but in the quiet realization that someone finally understood her without her having to explain everything. She whispered, her voice thin and soft. "Please, don't leave me alone tonight. I don't mean it in a wrong way. I need someone right now. Just tonight. I need you to stay." Her words trembled, but not with shame. She spoke from the deepest part of her heart, the part she hid from everyone. Caleb took a slow breath. He had never been someone people depended on, at least, not in a long time. And hearing her say she needed him, even if only for comfort, brought a gentle ache to his chest. He lowered his hand softly from her cheek. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. "Not tonight." Mara's tears eased, her breathing steadier than before. She took a small step closer again, not leaning heavily against him this time, but simply standing near him close enough to feel supported, safe, and understood. And then, without rushing, without pressure, without anything intense or inappropriate, Caleb leaned forward slightly. His action was slow, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. She didn't. Their foreheads touched first, a soft, warm connection. Mara closed her eyes, letting a gentle calm settle over her heart. Caleb's hand rested lightly on her upper arm, steady and kind. Then, in a moment that felt natural and quiet and full of emotional warmth, Caleb pressed a soft, respectful kiss to her forehead. Not rushed, not passionate, just comforting, just human. Just two tired hearts finding a gentle moment of peace in the middle of a long, hard night. Mara let out a small breath, as if a weight had lifted from inside her. Her shoulders relaxed. Her heart felt calm for the first time in months. The rain slowed to a faint drizzle. The glow from the church softened. The night grew quiet around them. In that peaceful stillness, they stood together, not as two people caught in a dramatic moment, but as two souls finally allowed to rest, finally allowed to feel, finally allowed to be honest. And though neither of them said it out loud, both knew. Something important had changed tonight. Something gentle, something real, something they had both needed without realizing it. It was not a dramatic beginning. It was a quiet one. A beginning built on comfort, trust, and the simple truth that sometimes two hearts meet in the middle of a difficult night and finally understand each other. The fire burned long into the night, and even though the town's small fire crew tried their best, the old church could not be saved. By sunrise, all that remained was a smoky, broken frame, a few standing beams, and ashes scattered across the ground where people had prayed, celebrated, cried, and grown up. It was a painful sight for everyone in the town, but for Mara and Caleb, it carried a deeper meaning. They had lived through it, together. And now everything felt different, as if the fire had taken something away but also given something back. Mara stood near the ruins early the next morning, holding a cup of warm water that someone from the town had handed her. She looked tired, but her eyes were softer than usual. The fear she had held last night had faded, leaving behind calmness, mixed with sadness and hope. She watched the smoke rise slowly into the bright morning sky, as if it were carrying old memories away. Caleb stood a few steps behind her, unsure if he should go to her or give her space. He had never been a man who knew how to deal with delicate moments. He could lift heavy beams, fix fences, calm wild horses, and face storms without flinching. But standing behind a woman who had poured her heart out the night before felt different from any challenge he had known. He didn't want to say the wrong thing or appear too far or too close. He simply waited, watching her as the sunlight touched the side of her face. Mara heard his steps and turned to look at him. Her face relaxed when she saw him, and that small change told Caleb more than any words could have. She wanted him there. She wasn't pushing him away. He walked toward her slowly and stopped beside her, giving her a quiet nod. She breathed deeply, then spoke in a gentle voice. "It looks worse in the daylight." Caleb nodded. "Yeah, it does." For a moment, they simply stood there. The church had been a part of Mara's life since she was a child. She had played in the yard behind it, learned songs inside it, stood with her family at every celebration. Losing it felt like losing a piece of her past. Caleb knew that even without her saying it. Mara placed a hand on her chest, as if holding something inside. "I'm not sure how we'll rebuild. It feels strange to think about starting again." "Starting again is hard," Caleb said quietly, "but it's not impossible." She looked at him, her eyes steady. "You've started again more than once, haven't you?" He didn't answer right away. Caleb wasn't used to talking about his past. The town had heard rumors about him ever since he arrived, and most people had judged him based on stories they didn't know were true or not. But after what happened at the church, things were different. People had seen him run through flames to save Mara. They had seen the truth with their own eyes. It had changed something in them. After the fire was under control the night before, many townspeople had gathered around, watching Caleb carry Mara out. No one had looked at him with suspicion or fear. Instead, there was respect in their eyes, something he hadn't felt in a long time. "I guess I've had a few starts," he finally said. "Not all of them easy." Mara gave a small smile. "Maybe that's why you were there last night. You knew how to stay calm when everything was falling apart." Caleb shook his head. "No. I just knew you were in there. That was enough." Her smile deepened, but she looked away again, watching the smoke rise. "You don't have to think about that," Caleb said softly. "You're here, That's what matters. The morning grew brighter, and soon more people arrived to see the damage. They greeted Mara gently, offering kind words and support. When they looked at Caleb, they didn't turn away or whisper. Instead, they thanked him firm handshakes, sincere words, nods filled with gratitude. It felt strange for Caleb. He had never been the center of anyone's praise, and he didn't like attention. But he accepted it quietly because he knew it mattered not for his pride, but because it meant the town was beginning to see him differently. Mara watched each person speak to him, noticing how Caleb lowered his head slightly every time he was thanked. It made her heart warm. She knew how difficult it was for him to let people in, and she was proud of him in a way she couldn't quite explain. Once the crowd thinned, Mara touched his arm lightly. "You're part of this town now. Whether you plan to be or not." Caleb raised an eyebrow. "Part of it? That fast?" She laughed softly. "They saw what you did. They saw your heart. Sometimes people just need a clear moment to understand something they missed before." He looked around at the people still walking, talking, and working together. "I'm not used to this. Most places I left before anyone noticed me." "Well," Mara said gently, "this time you stayed long enough to matter." Her words settled over him like a warm blanket. He didn't know how to respond, so he looked at the ruins again. "What happens now?" he asked. "We rebuild," she said simply. "Not just the church. Everything. My life. This town's memories. Maybe even the way things are. Between us." Caleb turned to her, surprised. "Between us?" Mara nodded. "Last night wasn't just fear. I meant what I said when I asked you not to leave me. I've felt alone for a long time, even when surrounded by people. But when you were there, I didn't feel alone." He took in her words, feeling them settle into the part of him he kept guarded. "I'm not going anywhere," he said softly. They didn't need to say anything more. Both of them stood there, not as two people from different worlds, but as two people who had walked through the fire and come out with something new inside them. Over the next days and weeks, the town began planning how to rebuild the church. Volunteers gathered. Fundraisers were organized. Meetings were held. Mara worked tirelessly, offering ideas, managing details, and motivating everyone. But she didn't do it alone. Caleb was always beside her, lifting wood, clearing debris, offering steady strength whenever she needed it. People started seeing them together so often that it became natural. No one questioned it. No one whispered. It felt like something the town accepted with warmth. As the ruins were cleared and the ground was prepared for new construction, Mara and Caleb spent quiet moments talking about the future. Not big plans, just gentle conversations about where life might lead them. Sometimes they talked about simple things: sunsets, ranch work, favorite places in town. Sometimes they talked about heavier things: past pain, trust, and how fire can destroy but also reveal truth. One evening, the foundation of the new church was finally laid. It was just a rough outline of stones and wood, but to everyone who stood around it, it felt like hope. Mara placed her hand on one of the stones, feeling its cool surface. Caleb stood behind her, watching her quietly. "It's starting," she said softly. "Yeah," he replied. "It is." She turned to him. "You helped make this possible." "So did you." She took a small step closer. "We both did. Together." Caleb felt a warmth spread through him, not from the sun, but from her presence, from the truth in her voice, from the idea of a life where he didn't have to keep running. Mara smiled, a calm, grateful smile. "I'm glad you stayed," she said. Caleb looked into her eyes and finally let himself admit what he had been feeling since the night of the fire. "I'm glad I stayed too," he said, softly. The sounds of people talking and building filled the air. But in that moment, the world around them felt quiet and peaceful. They stood close, sharing a future they had not planned but now welcomed. The fire had taken the old church, but it had also cleared a path for healing, for truth, for a connection that felt strong and honest. And as the new foundation settled into the earth, another foundation was forming beside it, one that would carry them forward into the life they were slowly building, one day at a time, hand in hand.